You're an infantryman in the French army, standing in a long line of sweating soldiers at the foot of the Ardennes Mountains. It's usually one of the most beautiful and tranquil holiday destinations in Europe, but now the mountains are your best line of defense against the impending invasion. You've been sent here to defend from an abandoned farmhouse near the edge of a forest, and your fellow soldiers can't imagine any kind of war even making it to this part of the world. Still, you can't help but shake the feeling that something is coming. You've heard whispers about things going poorly in the north, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The rumor is the Nazis are already swarming across the borders, but all three countries stand between Hitler and northern France. No reason to panic now. It'll take the Nazis days and days of marching to even come close to. An explosion blows apart the farmhouse next to you. Then another hits the supply tent behind you, throwing you into the dirt. Ears ringing, you look up to the sky and see mortars hurling in your direction. Grabbing your rifle, you sprint for cover as the dull drone of the Luftwaffe swells overhead. Bombers appear from between the mountains and make a beeline straight for you. Trembling behind a wall, you poke your head out to scan the horizon, and you feel your heart sink. Then you see them, tanks. They're not just trundling forward, they're racing along, going at almost full speed, knocking down tree trunks and tearing chunks out of the earth with their treads. That can't be. A wave of soldiers, rifles raised, fill the woods, sprinting down the side of the mountain. You'd heard talks of the Blitzkrieg, but nothing could have prepared you for this. How had they been able to strike so soon? There's no way they could have traversed the Ardennes that quickly. Only an army that literally never slept could have made it here so quickly. How had they done it? The fall of France has to be one of the most remarkable events in military history. In just 6 weeks, the nation went from having a capable army prepared for a German invasion to waving the white flag. However, one key aspect of this defeat has been overlooked for decades, and it surprisingly involves performance-enhancing drugs. No, we're not talking about sketchy ways to improve your workout. We're talking about turning a country's soldiers into literal killing machine zombies. World War II may well be the largest event in human history to be directly and significantly shaped by drug use. Evidence uncovered from Hitler's personal physician has shown a new light on just how rampant drug use was throughout the Third Reich, from the bottom all the way to the top. In April 1940, just a matter of days before the Battle of France flared to life, Germany passed a so-called stimulant decree. Soldiers on the front lines were immediately sent around 35 million tablets of two drugs called Pervitin and Isofan. We'll get to exactly what those were in a second. Soldiers taking these little pills then swarmed across the borders into Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. To this day, Germany's Blitzkrieg tactic is still infamous. The idea is simple. You pick a key strategic target and strike it suddenly, with as much force as you can, as quickly as you can. The goal is to totally overwhelm and disorientate. You'll often start with bombardments from mortars and aircraft to do maximum damage right away and cut off supply lines and retreat routes. Then send in fast-moving tanks and infantry to surround the site in a Kessel, the German word for cauldron. You don't let off the heat in that cauldron until your opponent is defeated or surrenders. This has long been taught as the key reason why Germany was able to sweep through 4 countries so quickly. The fact that France fell in a little over a month shocked the entire world, even a number of senior Nazi officials who had raised concerns about the offensive strategy. Blitzkrieg relies on speed, catching your enemy off guard and moving faster than anyone expects you to. And boy, did the German military move fast. Part of the reason they were able to do this was due to Pervitin and Isofan. In the early 1930s, when the Nazis took power in Germany, they were quick to ban drug use. Hitler's vision for a perfect Aryan society in the early days of his political career was drug-free. Humans were to be strong through superior genetics, and keeping your body clean and pure was a big part of this, no contaminants. But in 1938, things started to change. A German pharmaceutical giant called Temmler Pharma developed a new pill called Pervitin. It was marketed as a kind of wonder drug. It promised to kickstart alertness and keep you focused and energized for hours on end. Think caffeine, but way more potent. The drug took off, being sold over the counter and entering the daily lives of Germans across the country. Temmler started ramping up production to meet demand. Curious about this new wonder drug, a military doctor named Otto Friedrich Ranke decided to run some tests on it. He gathered 90 university students and gave them regular doses of the drug to study its effects. Everything he saw looked remarkably promising. It increased alertness, boosted self-confidence, heightened concentration, and bravery when taking risks. The ability to stay up all through the night, reducing sensitivity to pain, hunger, and tiredness. This drug could win them the war. The boom of Pervitin in Germany made it easy to sell to the military higher-ups. Civilians throughout the country were using it to stay awake during night shifts or help boost their performance at work. A number of recreational drug users had taken to it as well, but that didn't quite line up with the Nazis' ideals. Fast forward to the Battle of France and you see Pervitin and the virtually identical isofan in action, particularly in the Ardennes Mountains. Traditionally, that kind of terrain would have taken days for soldiers to travel through. They'd march all day, sleep all night, moving slowly. Amped up on Pervitin, the soldiers were able to march not just all day and all night, but the same the next day and night. Soldiers would go for 50 hours at a time without sleep. That kind of endurance was unheard of on the battlefield and caught the Allies flat-footed. With Pervitin in their arsenal, the Nazis weren't just able to move across the border quickly, they could move all the way through France with lightning speed. We should also call Pervitin by the name we have for it today, meth. Pervitin was a form of methamphetamine in pill form, with basically the same chemical composition as the modern-day crystal meth that many across the US are addicted to. Without taking meth, the Nazis would not have been able to invade France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands so quickly. Their pilots in the Luftwaffe would have needed more rest or risked being tired during night raids, and could not be in the air for as many hours as they were without being shot down. Men on the ground would not have marched the kinds of distances they marched without the meth keeping them awake and dulling the exhaustion in their bodies. Who knows how World War II would have played out had it not been for that little pill? Would the Blitzkrieg strategy have failed in key locations if they moved too slowly? Would France and Britain have had time to adapt, regroup, and push back? But it wasn't just the Nazis taking drugs in World War II. Allied forces frequently took amphetamines, speed, to fight off fatigue in the middle of war. Morphine was handed out in small vials so soldiers on the battlefield could use it as a painkiller should they be shot or injured. Not all soldiers will have waited for those conditions to partake in the drug. And then, of course, there is one of the internet's favorite stories. And where else could it come from but one of the internet's favorite countries, Finland. We're going to fast forward a few years to 1944 for this one. Finland had been at war with Russia for around 4 years, into the Winter War and the Continuation War. It had been absolutely brutal. Arctic conditions, dense forests, sprawling lakes, not enough food to go around, and a border so large that neither army could adequately cover all of it. The soldiers, especially on the Finnish side, were exhausted. Defending such a small country from an invading force as colossal as Russia had taken all that Finland had. The men had been away from their homes for years, embedded deep in the Arctic Circle, enduring some of the harshest winters you can imagine. Frostbite wasn't just an idle threat, it was a daily struggle. Just existing here was life or death, even without fighting a war. As a result, the Finnish troops had taken to a fun new drug that was being shipped to them from their German allies, Pervitin. When they had a dose of that, suddenly the war felt a bit more manageable. It's up here in these conditions that we find the first recorded case of an overdose on the battlefield. Aimo Koivunen didn't much like Pervitin. He avoided taking it for the most part, not liking how it made him feel. But his situation had grown desperate. On a ski patrol mission, he and his squad had been ambushed by Russian troops. They managed to escape on their skis, but only just. The enemy was right on their tail. It was up to him to carve a way through the snow for the rest of his men to follow. But being first in line was exhausting work. Then he remembered the bottle of Pervitin in his pocket. Taking it out, he counted 30 tablets in there. Enough for everyone in his squad. But for whatever reason, Koivunen decided he'd just take them all himself. So he swallowed all 30 pills in one go. What could go wrong? He pushed on, skiing with an enormous burst of energy, carving through the snow like it was nothing as the waves of euphoria washed over his body. Then he blacked out. Only he didn't black out like a normal person would, he blacked out and kept skiing. Mile after mile he skied whilst completely unconscious, until eventually he woke up in a ditch totally alone. Cut off from the rest of his squad, he'd gotten himself lost in the Finnish wilderness whilst on the craziest drug trip maybe anyone has ever experienced. Tripping out of his mind, he pushed on, skiing in all different directions. At one point he ran into a Russian patrol and had to escape. At another point he went over a landmine and blew himself up, somehow surviving. Only after days had passed, his body's signals began to overtake the appetite-suppressing side of Pervitin and screamed at him to eat something. So he chewed some pine buds before catching a bird and eating it raw. When he finally wound up in the hospital days after the overdose, he had traveled over 250 miles, weighed just 94 pounds, and had a resting heart rate of 200. And somehow he lived to the ripe old age of 71. That's probably the most extreme example of Pervitin use we have from World War II. But if you take 1/30 of that energy and give it to every soldier on the battlefield, you could see how the Nazis were able to initially overwhelm the Allies despite having 1 million fewer soldiers and much older weaponry. But like we said at the beginning of the video, This rampant drug use was present throughout Hitler's entire regime from the bottom all the way to the top. It wasn't just the purveyance on the ground that shaped World War II, it was also the drug-addled minds of the Nazi leadership. This drugs-free ideology that was present at the start of the Nazi regime crumbled more and more as the war went on. There's one man in particular who we can study to track his change, why it happened, and what effect it had not just on the Nazi Party but on Adolf Hitler himself. While most people would not know his name, he played an incredibly pivotal role in World War II and ultimately in Hitler's downfall. This man was Dr. Theodor Morell. Morell was born to a relatively unremarkable family in rural Germany. His family were not wealthy, but he worked hard and eventually qualified as a physician. He served in the First World War as a medic in various capacities before returning to Germany to start his career in earnest. Morell was a social climber, and a good one at that. He managed to snag a wealthy actress as his wife and used her fortunes to open up a high-class medical practice in Berlin. As the Nazi Party began their rise to power, he saw the changing tides, and he knew he wanted to be on that ship. He networked his way in and managed to get Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, as a client. Hoffmann had a nasty health scare, but pulled through thanks to Morell, something that he raved about to none other than Adolf Hitler. And with that, Morell had burrowed his way into the pocket of one of the most notorious human beings to have ever lived. Hitler was having acute stomach pains that no one had been able to help with so far. Morell, always keen to be at the forefront of medical technology, suggested a different approach to cure him. He decided to give Hitler a combination of vitamins and a probiotic strain of the E. coli bacteria. It worked, and from then on Hitler would swear by Morell's medicine, welcoming any new and exciting concoction that the doctor could devise. And so began Hitler's descent into drug addiction, an addiction that would cripple his health and ultimately contribute to his army losing the war and him losing his life. Morell wasn't just Hitler's physician. Most of us go to a doctor when we feel unwell and then hopefully don't see them again for months or years until something else goes wrong. Not so with Hitler. Morell was welcomed into Hitler's inner circle and became a vital part of his daily life. It wasn't just Hitler who employed the man's services. A number of other senior Nazi officers got hooked on various different drugs following Hitler's example. Göring, for example, earned the nickname Moring for his love of morphine. Many of the others in Hitler's inner circle, however, turned their noses up at the doctor. They saw him as a social parasite. They were skeptical of miracle drug concoctions and even hated his body odor. Hitler then told them flatly that he employed Morell for his medicine, not for his bodily hygiene. What is most interesting about Dr. Morell is that he kept detailed notes on how he treated Adolf Hitler over the years. Looking through his records, we can find an accurate and horrifying account of exactly how drug-addled the Führer truly was. From these records, we can find a list of around 74 different substances that Morell administered to Hitler over the years in various combinations. Many are innocent vitamins, while others are off-the-shelf remedies you could find in any pharmacy. The most scary are the mixtures he created himself. Experimental medicine is putting it mildly. A number of the chemicals on the list are considered to be toxic to humans, with a number of poisonous substances in there. There are also hard drugs like heroin and methamphetamines. At its worst, Morell was injecting Hitler with drugs around 20 times a day. Hitler wasn't just taking a few multivitamins in the morning. He was likely spending a large amount of the war under the effect of psychoactive drugs. Hitler's health, of course, deteriorated over the course of the war. In 1944, he developed jaundice. When outside doctors came in to examine Hitler and the drugs he was taking, they found that Morell had been giving him huge quantities of strychnine, which was directly causing the jaundice. Hitler flew into a rage when the doctors told him this, refusing to believe that Morell could be wrong. Ironically, the more Hitler's health fell apart, the more he relied on the very drugs that were causing it. When Hitler was on Morell's drugs, he felt superhuman, but really, he was just feeling the euphoria of the chemical high. When the drugs would wear off, he'd feel terrible as all the harmful effects of the concoctions would catch up with him. Therefore, in his mind, the drugs were the thing holding him together instead of tearing him apart. Two of the key reasons behind Germany losing World War II were that they invaded Russia, opening up a second front line and stretching themselves too thin, and the fact that they lacked real leadership by the end of the war. Hitler's rampant drug use could have arguably influenced both of those things. Hitler was infamously paranoid. While likely being largely because he was a mass-murdering fascist dictator with enemies and spies all around him was the main cause, His paranoia was also likely warped and exaggerated by the drugs he was taking. While Hitler's initial plans at the start of the war proved to be very effective with his swift invasion of France, he became increasingly irrational and deranged as the war went on. Terrified of the Russian threat, he made the decision to go ahead with Operation Barbarossa and invade Russia, a decision which proved to be disastrous. Did the drugs heighten his paranoia and impair his judgment? He then also retreated into himself. Once a charismatic leader, always hosting rallies and positioning himself as a man of the people, Hitler became ever more detached as the days went on. Without him as figurehead, the Nazi Party fractured, with members fighting each other for power. With no one person in charge, the Nazis floundered in the latter stages of the war and crumbled completely. Was this because of Hitler's declining physical and mental health from years of drug abuse? During the final stage of the war, Hitler confined himself to his Führer bunker in the garden of Reich Chancellery, with only a limited number of people allowed to stay with him while his country fell apart around him. One of those men, of course, was Dr. Morell. During this part of the war, Hitler was now taking another new drug. Morell was injecting it into his arm daily, a drug called Eucadol, which we today know as oxycodone. Oxycodone is an opioid. It gives you an initial rush of euphoria before settling you into a prolonged drowsy state where your body and brain function more slower than normal. For a panicked man on the verge of losing a war, the drug must have been a lifeline for Hitler, giving him the thrill to keep him going before dulling the reality of his situation for hours. It is also highly addictive. As Germany crumbled, so did the supply of drugs. The Temmler pharma factory had been bombed. The economy completely collapsed. Manufacturing of drugs had all but stopped completely. Those 20 injections dried up. In 1945, Hitler sent Morell away with a number of others, leaving just a small contingent with him in the bunker. When Hitler ended himself, it's believed he did so at the height of his opioid withdrawals. Out of any class of drug in the world, opioids are the most notorious for having extremely painful withdrawal periods. Symptoms include dysphoria, insomnia, fever, nausea, diarrhea, and feeling like you have the flu. The cravings are all-consuming. Add to this Hitler's numerous health conditions, many of which were brought on by years of drug use. These include irritable bowel syndrome, skin lesions, cardiac dysrhythmia, coronary arterial disease, syphilis, borderline personality disorder, and Parkinson's disease. Sober for the first time in years, he would suddenly have to deal with the cold, hard reality of all these conditions, without the euphoric relief of psychoactive drugs to shield him. Then, of course, there are the Allied armies surrounding his position who will make life hell for him when they find him. And so Hitler did the job for them, using a cyanide pill given to him by none other than Dr. Morell. Hitler was not the person he was because of drugs. He wrote Mein Kampf years before meeting Dr. Morell. He outlined the final solution sober and radicalized Germany without the need for hard drugs. His decisions, under the influence or otherwise, were all his own. The drugs may have exaggerated his view of the world further, increased his paranoia, and ruined his physical health, but they did not make him the man he was. But you cannot deny that without drugs, without the meth fueling the Nazi troops or the poisonous cocktails shooting into Hitler's arm on a daily basis, bringing on his early death, World War II would have played out very differently. Now check out Hitler's plans for the USA if he won, or watch this video instead.